She constructed an empire on inspiration. He had only conviction and a creased letter in his pocket. When their lives intersected on the live television, no one anticipated what followed, not even them. What do you do when all that you've ever believed is lovingly, gently challenged? Tier 1 fans, this is for you. Press play to dive in. The setting was ready for just another uplifting TV special. Lights shining, cameras rolling, smiles practiced. But what happened that day wasn't on cue. It was heart deep. A media legend, revered for her insight, a senator respected for his unwavering faith, and one surprise question that made the discussion something no one could leave intact. What does it do to us when the realities we've constructed our lives around are respectfully challenged, not to destroy us, but to take us somewhere greater? When achievement, honesty, and spiritual exploration intersect, who will we be? This is a tale of bravery, the quiet kind, of grace that's surprisings, and of the potential for one man's gentle words to alter not just a room, but a heart. Let me transport you back to when it all started. The lights within the Harpo studio glimmered, sending golden hues throughout the stage. The floor shone, and the velvet seating provided the entire area with an air of shiny, refined sophistication. Sitting at its center was Oprah Winfrey, the media queen. She was a voice people trusted by the millions, a person who had influenced culture through loving conversation and strong interviews. The show today was a whopper. It was entitled Spirituality in the New Age, a theme episode packed with big hitters, religious figures, motivational speakers, and cultural figures. The crowd were abuzz, clapping their hands to the walls of the studio as the program went out live to millions at home. But behind Oprah's gentle smile and coached charisma, there was a subtle plan, something only she and her intimate producers shared. Her intention wasn't merely to discuss religion, it was to put her guest, Louisiana Senator John Nye Kennedy, in the hot seat. Oprah believed she could test his Christian convictions, perhaps even get the best of him, all before a worldwide audience. What she failed to see was that the instant he took the stage, it would all start to change in ways that no one was anticipating. Senator Kennedy emerged to a steady reserve. He was dressed in a carefully tailored Navy suit, nothing loud, just plain and intelligent. There was a tiny Bible tucked inside his jacket, not as a prop, but as an unobtrusive reminder of what he was there for today. The crowd greeted him with courteous applause, but there was an undercurrent of tension, a blend of curiosity and anticipation. Kennedy wasn't a typical politician. He spoke candidly about his Christian beliefs, even when it wasn't fashionable. Some referred to him as old-fashioned, others divisive, but he never retreated from what he stood for. Oprah welcomed him with her trademark warmth, her voice silky and welcoming. "Senator Kennedy, thank you for joining us today," she said with a smile that could calm even the most jitters-prone individual. "We're going to have a riveting conversation about spirituality, hope, and what guides us through life." Kennedy smiled faintly and nodded. "Thank you, Oprah. I'm glad to be here," he replied, his voice soft and rich with the accent of Louisiana's bayou. He settled comfortably into his chair, hands resting lightly on his knees, at ease but alert. In his mind, he knew this was not another interview. He was familiar with Oprah's fascination with spirituality, her costly classes, collaborations with New Age gurus, and her knack for taking ancient concepts and making them bestsellers. He did not come to be critical, yet he was not going to remain quiet if the truth was at stake. Before he got there, he'd prayed quietly. He asked God to give him the wisdom to speak clearly and the courage to stand his ground no matter what. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about standing up for something deeper. Oprah began gently, keeping things light at first. She inquired about his experience in the Senate, how he remained plugged into the people of Louisiana, and how he coped with the increasing polarization in politics. Kennedy answered candidly, punctuating his responses with flashes of Southern humor that drew a chuckle or two from the crowd. He described his trips to see farmers, teachers, and small-town ministers, accounts that made him sound like a man who hadn't lost touch with where he came from. But Oprah wasn't here to make small talk. She leaned forward slightly, her voice changing, enough to signal to everyone that the real conversation was about to start. "Senator," Oprah replied, her smile steadfast, though her eyes did narrow slightly. "You frequently refer to your Christian faith in your speeches. You've even gone so far as to say it's the foundation of your life. But in a world as diverse as ours, where people find meaning in so many disparate ways, don't you think it's a bit quaint to say there is just one way to God?" The question fell with silent force, like a dart directed squarely at the heart of Kennedy's publicly Christian faith. The room fell silent. All eyes were on the senator, waiting to hear how he'd react. Some people in the audience leaned forward, obviously interested. In a culture that prizes openness and inclusiveness, to imply there is only one path to God bordered on confrontational. Oprah had done her homework. It was a cleverly set trap. If Kennedy remained firm in his beliefs, he risked sounding intolerant. But if he caved, he'd risk diluting his faith. She was certain she had him trapped. But Kennedy didn't even flinch. Instead, he met Oprah's gaze, then slowly turned the same look toward the audience. His face was tranquil, benevolent. One of those gazes that somehow makes every person in the room feel understood. "Oprah," he said softly, "tell me about a woman named Mary from Baton Rouge." His tone grew slower, adopting the measured beat of a storyteller who was about to impart something important. "Mary's a single mother. Lost her husband in a car crash several years ago. She's supporting 3 children on a cashier's salary, struggling to make ends meet. Life hasn't been good to her. But every morning she sits at her kitchen table and prays. Not for money, not for an easier life, just for the strength to make it through another day." He paused for a moment, allowing the words to sink in. "She said her only thing that makes her keep going is her faith in Jesus. It's the light of her darkest moments." The studio was quiet, but not vacant. You could sense something had changed. There were no bright slogans or spiritual jargon here, only one woman's anguish and simple faith. A couple of individuals in the audience wiped away tears. The tale had pierced the sound and fallen somewhere deep. Oprah, still grinning, hadn't anticipated that. She was prepared for a theological discussion, not a narrative that connected faith with the naked, everyday struggles of life. In a flash, she interrupted, attempting to redirect the conversation to her spin. "That's a lovely story, Senator," she told him, her voice a bit cold, but with the gentle edge of a host politely steering a guest back on message. "But I wasn't inquiring about personal anecdotes. My question is this. Do you honestly think that your faith, with its insistence that there is only one path to God, is something to be encouraged in an open society? One in which people have every right to form their own spiritual destinies?" This time, her question was sharper, with a bit more push. Some in the audience murmured in assent. Oprah had been the public face of inclusive spirituality for years. She'd brought meditation and mindfulness to the masses. Her universe was one of many paths and multiple truths. Kennedy's take on Christianity, unabashed, exclusive in its claims, appeared to resist that sort of spiritual openness. But again, Kennedy remained humble. He nodded, as if acknowledging the gravity of what she requested. Then quietly, he leaned forward slightly. "Oprah," he replied, his tone firm but gentle, "I'm not forcing anything on anyone. I'm not here to make anyone believe what I believe. But you asked me about my faith, and if I'm going to answer you truthfully, I have to speak from the heart. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody gets to the Father except by me," he went on, his tone soft but unyielding. Those aren't my words. Those are his. If I really believe that, then I have a responsibility to pass it on. Not to impose it, not to bully or shame, but to invite. People can choose their own way, but I can't keep quiet about what I know to be true. His words struck the room with a still intensity. No yelling, no pointing fingers, simply plain conviction. The studio was silent as the crowd allowed it to settle. Some applauded softly, not necessarily in agreement with all that he said, but because they admired the guts it took to say it so honestly. Kennedy hadn't shouted or started a fight, but there was no confusing the distinctness of his message. It was as if a beam of light had pierced the confusion of warm, fuzzy spirituality. For the first time in her decades-long career, Oprah felt the interview getting away from her. She'd anticipated controlling this interview, molding it into an exercise in wide, expansive, consumer-friendly spirituality. But Kennedy was taking it in another direction. Something raw, something unedited, a moment of truth. Not prone to concede defeat, Oprah leaned in once more, her voice now tinged with steel. "Senator, you speak of absolute truth, of there being only one path to God. But do you actually think that billions of people across the globe, people who believe in other religions or no religion at all, are simply wrong? Doesn't your faith make you judge them?" It was a pointed question, a rhetorical pitfall. If Kennedy replied yes, he'd be arrogant and condescending about the diversity of the world. If he replied no, he'd be negating the very truth he'd just held up. The crowd could sense it. The tension mounted. Some people fidgeted in their chairs uncomfortably. Others bestowed small nods of encouragement upon Oprah. She had always been a champion of tolerance, of religious openness, and now they waited for her to take a stand. Kennedy breathed, not with hesitation, but to collect his words. He shut his eyes for a moment, a prayer silently between him and God. And then calmly, with quiet strength, looked Oprah dead in the eye. "Oprah," he said softly, "truth does not bend to numbers or to feelings." His voice was firm, steady. "If I think a bridge is down, I'm not going to encourage people to cross it, regardless of how confident they are that it's okay." He paused for only a beat, allowing the picture to sink in. "My faith is not about condemning others. It's about warning them and giving them hope. I'm not up here preaching, 'You're wrong because you're different.' I'm preaching, 'I've found something that revolutionized my life, and I want to share it with anyone who will listen.'" The analogy's simplicity struck home. A broken bridge. Not judgment. Concern. A warning by someone who simply wants to prevent others from falling. There was applause. It was not boisterous or ostentatious, but it was in waves, some slow clapping, others with heartfelt conviction. Even those who may have disagreed with him could not deny the unassuming power of his sincerity. Oprah's smile tightened just slightly. Her control over the moment was slipping, and for the first time, her polished composure showed a crack. She hadn't expected this. A politician who didn't dodge, didn't spin, but instead answered head-on with both humility and strength. "That's an interesting perspective, Senator," she said, her voice carrying a trace of tension. "We'll dive deeper into this, right after the break." The lights faded off stage. Commercials came on. Oprah glanced to the side at Kennedy. Her eyes flashed with frustration, but also a begrudging flash of respect. This was not going as she had intended, and she knew it. The next bit would be even hotter. And for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't sure she'd be the one calling the shots. Kennedy sat in silence, his eyes scanning the crowd. Deep in his heart, a humble prayer formed once again. He knew the ultimate test was yet to come. And what came next could turn everything around. The stage lights roared back on, bathing the set in a golden, warm light. The break was over, and the crowd, still buzzing from the first segment, leaned forward in their seats, eyes fixed on Oprah Winfrey, and the senator who had just turned the show on its head, John Neely Kennedy. What had begun as a slick talk show on spirituality in the New Age was now something else. The glitz and gloss were still present, but beneath, an actual war of beliefs was being waged. This wasn't chat. It was a reckoning. Oprah, normally composed and in control, was beginning to get just slightly rattled by Kennedy's measured, unyielding honesty. She had spent decades making a living by steering conversations, crafting stories, and creating a spiritual brand that was wide, inclusive, and ever marketable. But Kennedy, with his languid Southern accent and resolute determination, wasn't cooperating. He wasn't belittling or posturing, but he wasn't budging an inch. As the cameras began to roll, Oprah shifted forward slightly. Her smile was still on, slick and professional, but tighter now, more restrained. She was poised to regain control of the conversation. What she didn't anticipate was that Kennedy's next sentence would rock more than just the studio. Ed hit at the core of what she'd constructed. "Hello again, everyone," Oprah started out, her voice as smooth as always but containing a hint of steeliness underneath. The silk stretched over the steel. "We have with us Senator John Neely Kennedy discussing faith, truth, and how we derive meaning in the world today." She looked at him, her tone courteous but calculated. "Senator, you've offered some strong insights on your Christian faith, and I thank you for your honesty." She hesitated, allowing the compliment to sink in. It was a reminder to the audience she was still running the show here. "But let's get real for a second," she went on, voice dropping just a fraction. "You're a politician, and you've employed your faith to win over voters, to make yourself out to be a man of principle. Others may label that as manipulation, playing on people's emotions to gain their confidence. What do you have to say to that?" It was a precision strike, an accusation delivered with a smile. The suggestion was clear. You're not authentic. You're using religion to get votes. The crowd murmured. It was a familiar charge in politics, and Oprah knew it. She was hoping Kennedy would flinch, get defensive, or sidestep. Any of those would make him look like just another calculated figure, using faith as a campaign tool. The cameras zoomed in. But Kennedy didn't change. He dipped into the jacket pocket and produced a compact, folded square of paper. Its edges were creased, obviously having been handled so many times. He held it for an instant, not to illustrate a point, but as if it was stabilizing him. Then he placed it carefully on his knee. "Oprah," he said quietly, "let me tell you the story about a boy named Tommy. He's from New Orleans." The crowd leaned forward. They hadn't counted on this shift. Kennedy's voice had that storyteller's voice again, smooth, confident, and brimming with something richer than politics. "Tommy's 10 years old. He's been in and out of the hospital most of his life. Leukemia." Kennedy paused, letting the weight of that word sit in the air. "His mama wrote me a letter not long ago. She said Tommy had watched one of my speeches on TV. I'd been talking about faith, about how God's love gives us hope, even when the world feels like it's falling apart." He scanned the room, not for applause, but connection. "Mama said that Tommy took her hand and told her, 'Mama, if that man says God loves me, I ain't scared anymore.'" The words hung over the room like a soft blanket. Kennedy paused, not for effect, but to allow that moment to breathe. "I didn't share that story to get votes, Oprah. I shared it because children like Tommy, and mamas like his, need something authentic to cling to." He looked down at the paper on his knee, then back at Oprah. "My faith isn't a tool. It's why I do what I do." The studio fell quiet. No sharp laughter or easy applause this time. Only quiet. People were moved, emotional. Some brushed away tears. Others nodded slowly, the emotion apparent on their faces. Kennedy's tale had reached beyond argument. It had landed in a place that felt authentic, human, and true. Oprah, with all her emotional storytelling experience, hadn't anticipated that. She'd anticipated that he would pivot, deflect. He'd gone and told a story that hit her right in the heart. And at that moment, her empire, founded on stories that touched people, had been confronted with a story it wasn't ready for. Kennedy's story hadn't been honed. It hadn't been rehearsed. It was raw, straight from the heart, and thus was more powerful. Oprah rebounded easily. Her television instincts had kicked in as muscle memory. "That's a strong story, Senator," she said, her voice firm, though it had the slightest hint of tension. "And I don't think that it doesn't ring true with lots of people." She hesitated, then softly guided the discussion back to more secure territory. "But let's broaden the lens a bit. You tune in so intensely to Christianity as the truth. Don't you think that's a little too constricted, particularly in an international world in which human beings find significance through so many spiritual avenues?" It was a thoughtful shift, a means of taking things back to Oprah's comfort zone. For years, she had spoken for the possibility of spirituality as lovely mosaic. Buddhism, meditation, self-help, even mysticism of ancient times, all of these, in her eyes, converged to the same serene destination. But Kennedy's solid commitment to one truth collided with that vision, and Oprah was now actively trying to contradict it, possibly tear it down before an audience. The weight of the room settled silently. Some nodded. It was a question they'd probably asked themselves before. Kennedy didn't bat an eye. He leaned slightly back, hands gently folded, and met Oprah's gaze with a look of respect and firm resolve. "Oprah," he began, "I get that folks find meaning in a lot of different ways, and I'm not here to tell anyone they can't search for truth wherever their heart leads them." He paused. Then gently he added, "But tell me something. If you saw a kid standing there about to enter a burning building, would you say to them, 'There are plenty of ways out'? Or would you direct them to the one door that is safe?" The instant was charged. The room breathed softly. Some of them applauded involuntarily, moved before they knew it. The comparison was obvious, but it struck with the force of a lightning bolt. It wasn't bitter. It was imperative. It pierced right through the complacent haze of all roads lead the same place, and made people look at the price of being in error. Kennedy wasn't assaulting anybody else's views. He was begging in kindness. His language had a sort of spiritual definitiveness that couldn't be disregarded. For a fleeting moment, Oprah's smile faddered. She wasn't accustomed to guests turning the frame on her. The expression in the audience, surprised, pondering, some of them visibly shaken, warned her she was losing ground. "That's a powerful metaphor, Senator," she replied, her voice remaining civil but a little tighter now. "But you're evading the point. My work, my books, my classes, they've brought peace and purpose to millions of people. Are you suggesting that's all for nothing just because it doesn't comply with your belief system?" It was a setup, an emotional trap. If Kennedy dismissed her work, he'd sound chilly, almost arrogant. But if he overpraised it, he'd undermine his point. Everyone in the room felt the tension now. The stakes were high. Oprah wasn't just defending her ideas, she was defending her life's work. Kennedy took a breath, not out of nervousness, but to choose his words with care. He looked right at Oprah, and in his eyes was something unexpected. Compassion. "Oprah," he said quietly, "I don't doubt that you've helped people feel better. Your kindness, your encouragement, that's real. And it matters." He paused for just a moment. "But feeling better isn't the same as being saved." A hush fell over the studio. "Your classes. Maybe they'll soothe someone's suffering for a short time," he went on. "But they don't provide the greatest answers. Why are we here? What does it mean when we die?" He stopped again, his voice soft but firm. "My faith teaches only Jesus has the answers, and I'd be dishonest if I said otherwise." Silence. The kind of silence that weighed heavily, nearly sacred. He hadn't struck her. He hadn't sent her away. But he had painted a stark line between fleeting comfort and everlasting truth. Seated in the audience, many were bearing the burden of that distinction. Individuals who'd invested thousands in self-help weekends, miracle mindset workshops, or vision board workshops were suddenly wondering, was this enough? Kennedy hadn't sold them a product. He'd sold them something more. Kennedy was providing something different, something that could not be purchased or sold. It was free, but somehow greater than anything that money could obtain. For the first time in her long, storied career, Oprah felt exposed. Her whole platform had been predicated on the belief that spirituality could be tailored, packaged, groomed, and marketed. But Kennedy's spirituality did not work that way. It was not branded. It was not sellable. And that made it a threat to the empire she had built. Struggling to reassert control, Oprah's voice rose slightly, the edge returning. "Senator, you're talking about salvation like it's only available through your beliefs. But what about the wisdom in other traditions? What about the billions of people who find joy and meaning outside of Christianity? Are they all just misguided?" The audience clapped, some of them clearly relieved. Oprah was still their hero, the one who'd shown them to question everything, to seek the divine within. Kennedy, insisting as he did on one truth, seemed to be a threat to that freedom. He didn't give in, though. He reached down and touched the crumpled paper in his lap once more, grasping it as though it was worth more than words. "Oprah," he told her, his tone firm but with a sense of purpose. "I'm not here to debate who's right and who's wrong. I'm here to share what I know." He paused, allowing the moment to breathe. "When I was growing up, I looked for truth everywhere. Books, philosophies, grand ideas. I tested it all." His eyes swept the crowd, as if recalling the burden of that search. But none of it satisfied the hollowness within. Not until I found Jesus, not a religion, not a system, a person. Someone who looked at me, flaw and all, and said, "Come to me, and I'll give you rest." He leaned in a little, not in a challenge, but in an invitation. "That's not arrogance. That's surrender. I'm not a preacher. I'm just a man who seized a lifeline. And now I want to toss it to anyone out there who's drowning." The words slam like a wave, deep and broad and impossible to miss. Some in the crowd were clapping. Others just sat there, shocked, tears-blurred eyes blinking to clear the vision. Kennedy was not attempting to impress. He was not promoting a brand. He was just telling what had altered his life. And the impact was unmistakable. Oprah's fingers clutched the arms of her chair. Her smooth presence, her expertly practiced poise, seemed to be beginning to crack. She'd spent decades being the voice of encouragement, selling encouragement packaged in glossy formats and best-selling books. But Kennedy's message didn't require a stage. It didn't require a microphone. And now the crowd wasn't looking at her anymore. They were staring at him. And not just viewing, listening. Actually listening. For the very first time, she felt the spotlight shifting away from her. Struggling to regain control, Oprah tried one final thing. Her voice cut. "Senator," she replied, her voice cool and clipped, "your religion obviously does a great deal for you. But let's be realistic. You're a public figure, a man of power. When you speak of Jesus as the only path, you're not merely expressing a private opinion. You're influencing how people think, how they vote, how they live." She leaned in, driving home the point. Isn't that a sort of power you're exerting? Perhaps an even dangerous one? It was a gutsy charge. To say that Kennedy's philosophy was not about hope, but about control. The audience murmured. Some nodded. Others remained rigid, anticipation riding on their shoulders. Kennedy met Oprah with eyes that did not waver, soft but firm. "Oprah," he said softly, "power's a curious thing. You can use it to build yourself up, or to lift someone else." He sat forward, his voice steady, sure. "My faith? It's not about control. It's about freedom. Freedom from fear, from guilt, from chasing after things that never last." He paused, then glanced down at the paper again. "I talk about Jesus because I've seen what he can do. For people like Tommy. For Mary. For me. If that's power, then it's not mine. It's his." He lifted the worn letter, his voice quieter now, but full of intensity. This is from Tommy's mama. She sent it just last week, thanking me for giving her little boy hope." He looked back at Oprah, kindly, not defiantly. "That's why I'm here, not to win an argument, but to point people to the one who can carry them through." The studio erupted. This wasn't the courteous applause earlier. This was different. They were on their feet, applauding, sobbing. Some mouthed prayers, some simply placed their hands over their hearts. And Oprah? She remained transfixed, her face white, her eyes far away. She wasn't merely losing an argument now, she was losing the... Kennedy's words had accomplished something Oprah's empire, for all its success, had never quite succeeded at doing. They'd struck deeper, into something divine. As the segment went into a commercial break, Oprah turned to him. Her look was no longer challenging, but softer. Blended in her eyes was a quiet defeat and a growing respect. She knew that the last segment of the program would count for more than anything that had preceded it. Not only for the audience, but for her, for her own heart. Kennedy folded the letter respectfully and put it back in his pocket. His heart was at peace, unshakable. He had no idea what was going to happen in the next few minutes, but he was prepared. When the show came back from commercial, Harpo Studios wasn't just a typical talk show set anymore. There was quiet in the room, something holy. The viewers had also changed. They weren't just watching television anymore. They were on the edge of their seats, hearts wide open, minds full of questions. Senator John Neely Kennedy sat quietly, his tiny Bible folded discreetly into his jacket. He wasn't there to gain applause. This was something greater, something that might cost them both, his message and Oprah's reputation. Oprah sat with tightly clenched hands in her lap. Her customary media aura had been a little muted, replaced by something more authentic. Doubt. She breathed slowly. "Senator Kennedy," she started, her voice softer now, no longer terse or defensive. "You've given us a lot to consider. Your faith, your stories. They're moving." She looked him straight in the face now, as if seeking something more than just the answer. "But I need to know this," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "How can you be so certain that your way, your Jesus, is the only truth?" She stopped, visibly shaken. "I've dedicated my life to assisting people in obtaining peace, through meditation, self-knowledge, ancient philosophy. Are you telling me all of that is just mistaken?" This wasn't a trap now, not strategy. It was genuine. The audience leaned forward. They could feel it too. Oprah, the queen of manicured spirituality, was dropping her guard, perhaps even shattering, and they were watching it happen, live. Kennedy didn't shift in his seat. He simply looked at her with kind, steady eyes. Then, without thinking, he touched the folded letter again, not to display it, but to remind himself of why he was here. "Oprah," he said softly, his voice warm and low. "I'm not here to tear down what you've built, and I'm not saying every path people walk is meaningless." He looked around the room. "I'm just saying, I discovered the one that's true. Not because I'm better, not because I'm smarter, but because it discovered me." He paused, allowing his words to settle into the silence. "When I was lost, truly lost, Jesus didn't ask me to ascend up to him. He descended down to me, broken and all." His eyes locked with hers once more, filled with something deeper than conviction, compassion. "That's not a theory? That's a lifeline." He leaned slightly forward, his tone gentle but firm. "You've made a lot of people experience peace, and that's healthy. That's important. But peace that fades when the course is over, or the funds are gone, that's not sufficient. What we need is hope that endures." He fell silent. "And I think only Jesus provides that kind of hope." The room did not applaud. They did not gasp. They simply sat in silence. Some nodded subtly, others rubbed their eyes. A few scanned their minds as if seeking to make sense of what they'd heard, what they were experiencing. And Oprah? Her hands quivered ever so gently in her lap. Not out of fear, but out of something else. Awakening. For all the years that she had constructed an empire based on inspiration, books, teachings, and masterclasses, had she perhaps missed something? Kennedy's words had been plain, yet in being plain, they'd uncovered something she'd not yet been prepared to see. Her labor had reassured millions. Yet had it ever actually rescued anyone? She attempted to speak. "Senator," her words cracked, then settled. "I've touched millions of lives. I've witnessed lives transformed. Do you mean that doesn't count? Because it's not from your religion?" There was no anger in her tone now, just a deeper ache, wrapped in a question she barely dared to ask. What if I've been wrong? Kennedy didn't strike back. He didn't correct or preach. Instead, he smiled gently. The kind of smile that doesn't challenge, but embraces. "Oprah," he said quietly, "what you've done does matter. Kindness always does." He paused again. "But the real question isn't whether people felt better. It's whether you've pointed them to the one who can make them whole," Kennedy said quietly. "Jesus didn't come just to make us comfortable. He came to make us new." His words echoed in the stillness like a quiet thunderclap, not loud, but powerful, and the audience felt it. Some softly applauded, others sat, eyes wide, frozen. For too many, it felt as if their own spiritual path was being exposed, there, on a stage previously reserved only for cameras and praise. Oprah's expression changed. Her face, always so tightly controlled, faltered. Her eyes filled with tears that she hadn't anticipated, and didn't attempt to blink away. For the first time, she didn't view herself as the bringer of hope. She saw herself as someone who had, maybe, been offering a substitute for it. And in a moment that would be replayed, shared, and talked about around the world, Oprah stood up. Her legs were unsteady. "Senator," she began, her voice barely holding, "I've built my whole life, my career, on helping people." She hesitated, the emotion catching in her throat. "But if I've been pointing them to the wrong thing..." She paused. Her response was in a whisper. "What does that make me?" There was tension in the air. No one shifted. The audience breathed silently, shocked. Their icon, Oprah, wasn't attempting to command the moment anymore. She wasn't acting. She was begging. Kennedy stood too, not to win, not to take, but to meet her where she was. He moved nearer and laid a soft hand on her shoulder. "Oprah," he said, his tone firm, gentle. "It makes you human, just like the rest of us." He halted, his words encircling her like a blanket. "The good news? Jesus doesn't require you to have it all worked out. He takes all your mistakes, all the broken pieces, and makes something beautiful. That's grace." Tears streamed down Oprah's cheeks, and this time, she didn't try to hide them. The audience, many crying too, sat in awe. The stage didn't feel like a show anymore. It felt like holy ground. And then Oprah did something no one expected. She knelt, not in defeat, not for drama, but in surrender. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I've always been in control." Kennedy knelt beside her gently. "That's where he wants you," he said quietly. "At a loss, ready to hear. That's where we all begin." He turned to the congregation, his voice now tranquil and filled with understanding. "Jesus said, 'Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.'" He stopped. "That's not about finances. That's about recognizing you need him. That's where freedom starts." And at that instant, Harpo Studios didn't seem like a TV studio. It seemed changed, like something authentic was occurring, something more profound than ratings or reach. Kennedy bowed his head. He prayed, not theatrics, but sincerely. "Jesus," he prayed, "here's your daughter, Oprah. She is weary of bearing the load by herself. Show her your love, your truth, your rest." Oprah wept, not the composed tears of a talk show segment, but the raw exposure of a heart splitting wide open for the very first time on national television. When the program concluded, there was no music, no flashing lights, no final monologue, but only a hush, a real one, a reverent one. Oprah rose slowly, her features softened, her eyes sparkled. "I have no idea what that looks like for my work," she admitted. "But I do know I cannot return to acting like I know it all." The audience cheered, not to applaud entertainment, but to salute coup. The audience followed her. Some knelt in prayer. Others simply sat, allowing the holy quiet to envelop them. Rage. Over the coming months, Oprah did something no one anticipated. She closed her spirituality courses, closed down her high-priced self-help offerings, and quietly reframed her focus on service. Quiet, behind-the-scenes service. She went to hospitals, sat with mourning families, and started to share the plain, unbranded hope she'd discovered, the hope that Kennedy's life had helped bring into bloom. And as for him, Senator Kennedy went back to the Senate, his faith unwavering, but his humility, it had been deepened. This narrative, it teaches us that truth, when shared with love, can cut through even the thickest walls. That faith doesn't require flash or wealth. It requires only honesty and an open heart. In a noisy world and a culture of fast fixes, Kennedy's courage whispers something that has a staying power. Seek what matters. Love. Grace. And a Savior who meets you right where you are. So ask yourself, what are you still clinging to? And are you courageous enough to let truth redefine it? The way to freedom? It starts with the first honest step.